Welcome to our podcast, Our Story to Tell, where we share the behind the scenes of moving our family abroad and how that move changed everything.
We're Rissa and Tanner, an American family living life abroad with our two little adventures. From the U.S. to Germany, Japan, and now Italy, this podcast is more than just travel. It's a story of transformation, too.
Everyone has a story, and this is ours. And who knows, maybe this will sound a little bit like yours, too.
So, let's get started.
Welcome back. This is episode 6. We're jumping into another exciting chapter of our lives. This is where we took one of the biggest leaps of our life to move across the world to a country we had never been to, traveled to live for a couple of years, or so we thought, right?
Yeah, this podcast episode is one that we've received a lot of questions about throughout our time living abroad. Of course, when we were in Germany, we had people very interested in our story. That's where our YouTube channel took off. But I feel like after leaving Germany, everyone has continued to ask why we left, for one, but then how we felt about Germany compared to Japan, how we felt about Germany compared to Italy now. I feel like there's a lot of curiosity about our thoughts regarding our time in Germany.
This first step was huge for us because it was, as Elsa would say, into the unknown. And like really, that was for
Girl
our
dad,
girls.
you can tell.
That was for our girls for sure. But in reality, it was one of those most transformative times for us, living outside of the country, living away from the support system, and really molded the type of people who we are today.
Mm-hmm. And we did it during COVID. So it was March of 2021. Honestly, all feels like a long time ago, but at the same time, not that long ago. It's kind of crazy. We're coming up now on 5 years. In March of 2026, it's going to be a 5-year celebration of living abroad, which was the max amount of time we thought would be abroad in general. But yeah, we're arriving in Germany. It's peak of COVID. And so because of that, our transition to Germany was kind of unique and honestly kind of nice because you had mandated 2 weeks where we had to quarantine in our temporary housing. Having moved 3 other times, I'm like, I wish we had 2 weeks where we could just adjust to the time. We didn't have to go out. You didn't have to start work.
But before we hop into like that new stage, recapping the last episode was episode 5. We talked about like our life post-travel and really building up to becoming parents, buying a house, me stepping into my first full-time job, you starting your private practice for dietetics. There was a lot of moving parts during that time. So if you're interested, go ahead and listen to that one because it has a lot of our developing into our like adult professional stage in a very short time and then us transitioning into this huge step.
It also included Willa's birth, which actually recording the video made me kind of emotional, not just because her birth was incredible, but because there's a lot of emotions that come when you step into parenthood. And so it is fairly vulnerable, I would say, in that regard. And you might find yourself being able to relate.
And honestly, that is part of like our podcast. We want to be able to share experiences and let people know that like this has been ours. And there's likely so many others who have experienced something the same or with enough similarity that they feel like they're not alone.
Yeah, I feel like in that episode, if you're a parent, you can probably relate in some way or another. It was a fun insight to something that we really haven't talked that much about.
So jumping back into our move, as Rissa said, it was spring of 2021. We had to get crazy last minute COVID tests. We flew on a near empty plane all the way across the Atlantic and we made our way into Europe. My boss picked us up. We got driven across the country. I was falling asleep literally on the drive there.
Like, it's your boss, not mine.
I had not slept on the airplane, so I was fighting it so hard. But we eventually made it to Grafenwehr, which is where we worked and lived for the couple years. And we just remember looking out and saying, wow, this is like our new chapter.
Yeah, it seemed green at the time, even though obviously as we experienced summer, March in Germany is not nearly as green as it's about to be. But for us coming from a desert in Utah, everything was so green. And it was just so fun to see the houses outside the road. Just the German architecture and just so tired, but so excited for this adventure. Travel was something that we had fallen in love with. And I think we just had a really strong sense of experiencing the world. Like anything that was new that we could learn about, we were so eager to do that. And that was the mindset that we had as we entered into our temporary housing. During this time, we had started YouTube, right? So we're filming our first reactions of our temporary housing, which was honestly our best temporary housing of all of our international moves. We did have some things we had to adjust to, though. There were quite a bit of culture shocks in the first couple weeks.
So let's dive into a few of those. We were very close to the base, which made it nice. I could be without a car. I rode a bike that I picked up when we got there. That made it just very nice to not have to rely on a vehicle.
And to live outside of the base. This was the only temporary housing that was off the base. And I really enjoyed that, to be able to like be more integrated in the country.
There were a lot of aspects of it that were very nice, that we could just leave from the place and go walk in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
First thing that we had to get used to was recycling. Like, that was the first thing that you're exposed to. Thankfully, during the time, we had a coworker who went and picked up groceries for us, because we technically were limited on how much like movement we had because of the quarantine. Immediately, we're faced with like 5 different bins of like recycling, whereas we grew up, it was pretty much you could have cardboard recycling, but everything else was garbage. That took a little bit of getting used to. Still to this day, all of our moves have included a very robust recycling programs. So it feels weird for us to go back to just not having them.
Yeah, it's actually really hard for me. I feel like I've become more German minded or Japanese minded in that sense of the importance of recycling.
Or
And
Italian, because
yeah,
they have a
Italians
really
as
great
well.
program here too.
Yeah, of just being more environmentally aware. And unfortunately, that's something that small towns that we grew up in, like they just don't have the funding or
Infrastructure, or
Yeah.
even the mindset, because it's the culture. It's having decades of programs that have been put into. So that's just like an interesting aspect that we didn't realize how big of an impact it would have. It was a learning curve though.
Yes.
So it took effort, not necessarily difficult, but you have to constantly remind yourself like, oh, I have to take the extra 5 seconds or 30 seconds to separate these things. And at the end, I have a very small bin of waste, and I have 4 other bins of equally distributed materials.
Yeah, definitely a lot to learn. That was, I would say, probably one of the first culture shocks. And then once we were able to go outside and able to go shopping, the grocery stores in Germany was probably like one of our second largest culture shocks.
In Germany, things are very well laid out, as German structure tends to be. But then there's also like this foreign feeling when we first go in there, and it's very quiet. Like, no one's having small chat besides a few random encounters, like me asking somebody like where this product is or whatever.
Someone at the bakery section ordering food, or at the butcher section. Like, you always hear that kind of conversation going on, because most times there is someone ordering something to be freshly sliced or freshly cut, which I love. I love supermarkets in Europe, because although I would say they're not as great as going to a different bakery that's like its own shop, you can still find amazing varieties of bread and cheeses. It's just so fun to stand in front of a cheese section in a European supermarket and see what's there.
Yeah. And that doesn't discredit. There probably are plenty of places in the States that have a really good bakery and stuff. Just our upbringing, the quality difference between the bakeries within a supermarket were just like drastically different.
I mean, we're comparing German bakeries to US. It's, in my head, I don't mean it poorly to a lot in the States, but like it's just elevated in Germany, the baked breads.
Yeah, I
I
will agree
still
with
miss
that.
them. And I'm in Italy, and we have amazing food culture here, and quality of food in Italy is amazing. But the bread in Germany,
Yeah, we agree. It's definitely better.
and we miss it if you can't tell.
Another aspect with the supermarket is just the culture behind the checkout. The other day I saw a reel on Instagram, and it was making a satire skit about how fast you have to be as the buyer once you're like going through the checkout. It was kind of like this countdown for the race. And the reason why is because the cashier has a clock. So from the time that they start the first scan till the last scan is done, they basically get an average of how many items were scanned in a time. I think it's based on a performance there, from what I understand. There's no small talk. It's just very quickly like beep, 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 beep. And you have to bag your own stuff. That was another thing. There's no baggers.
If you forget your bag, you're going to have to be paying for
Reusable.
like a reusable bag, which we actually love. I think that's what should just be universal, is everyone bringing their own bags. However, if you're not used to that, then you forget, and then you're like crap throwing on bags to buy, and you've bought so many you could do groceries for the village. It just becomes kind of like an anxious scenario. And I'm typically not an anxious person. Sure, I can get stressed. I'm kind of type A. I like to plan, that kind of thing. But when it comes to anxiety, I feel like it's something that I don't experience as much. But at the German supermarkets, especially when checking out, I can feel that. And the worst scenario is if you forget to like weigh your produce. Do you remember we forgot to weigh the bananas?
Like, And then they have to like go run off and go do it because they're faster at doing. Anyway, it's just like a new thing that we weren't used to weighing produce. Growing up, we were not used to weighing produce. I'm sure there are some places in the US that have it, but we were not. And so even today, like have to physically try to remember, yeah, I got to do that.
I do feel like you're having to like bag yourself at like Olympic speeds, because in the States, typically there's a teenager that's just, hi, how are you doing? There's a lot of like small talk in an American supermarket experience, at least where we grew up in Utah, northern Utah. It's just fairly relaxed, sometimes social. There's even like a bagger for you that then they can bag in the supermarket bags.
Notably in like 2 double plastic bags, and you don't have to pay for those. They are starting to have to pay them in other places. Yeah, the culture whole behind it is just very different, where it's like, it's all on you, not really the small talk. And in some ways, it's honestly nice that there's not the expectation. You're not going to be perceived as someone rude if you're not having a conversation. Everyone's like, I'm here to shop. And, if someone decides to engage in conversation, it might be a little weird because they probably aren't expecting it. But it's not like every single time I go to the store, I'm going to have to expect to have 2 or 3 micro conversations, because it's just kind of culturally something to do. Another thing that was interesting about at least Bavaria and many parts in Germany is that supermarkets were closed on Sunday. It was Ruhetag, or rest day. So that was something that was actually really nice. We enjoyed being forced to not go shopping on Sundays, even though that wasn't common for us. We didn't go shopping on Sunday growing up, and we just like planned accordingly.
Yeah, I feel like coming from Utah, it felt very familiar to have Sunday as more of a rest day. However, the reason behind it did feel a little different. It didn't feel as church related so much. It felt more of just the cultural norm because they wanted to have a rest day. Although in Bavaria, there was a lot of church influence stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if it came from a religious reason. But for sure, where we grew up, it's a little more frowned upon to go out to supermarket and Sunday, because that's the time you should be at church and then home with your family. So as we're talking about these experiences, we did have our YouTube channel at this time. So you can see us go to our very first German supermarket in live time. You'll be able to see our reactions, to learning about eggs on the shelf and milk also on the shelf, and just the variety and differences of foods. That's something we're not going to spend too much time talking about right now, but just know you can go and see that.
We'll maybe pick a few of our favorite videos that we have talked about, or like experiences we talk about in this video, because quite honestly, we would probably have 12 or 24 of them if we listed them all out. But you can definitely go back and you can see a lot of these.
Real quick, what were our favorite supermarkets?
I would say we shopped at Edeka the most because it was like one of the closer ones that we had. But if we were in the area of Kaufland, that was another place that we really enjoyed.
Kaufland was the closest thing we had to a mega supermarket where you could find a lot of varieties. And it was large, it was like 2 floors. I loved Kaufland. Kaufland. I don't know.
Kaufland. Doing great.
Practice my German pronunciation. But we also really liked Aldi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'd go to Riva.
I miss the dairy prices. You can get mozzarella cheaper, or you used to be able to, at an Aldi than we're finding here in Italy, which was shocking to me.
Yeah, there were quite a few products that you could get at a cheaper price than we can here right now.
Like Greek yogurt too. It's like €4 to €5 for a Greek yogurt container here in Italy. But there at an Aldi, we could get it for like $1.80.
Maybe a little bit more now, of course, but it was definitely a noticeable difference, even if it had been 2 years since we'd been there. We definitely devoured and loved so many different types of dairy. Not even going to mention quark. We miss quark.
Well, now that you did, every time we go to Austria, we always try and stock up on it, because we did get a lot of fun, like German recipes, like waffle recipes and quark Bällchen, stuff like that.
Yeah. And if just for a little short note, quark is like a thick yogurt, to keep it in simple terms.
Okay, that was a lot for grocery stores, but it is quite the thing. We didn't even mention you have to have a coin to get your grocery cart. That was something that took some getting used to, because at that point, we're Americans and Americans have credit cards. They don't really carry cash, but Germany is a country where cash is king.
One thing we did notice as we would walk out of our little temporary housing was it just seemed very peaceful and quiet. This was probably because we're in an area that's more farm town and it's like not a bustling city. There wasn't a train station in the area. So everyone's getting around on cars, not so much on like bikes and on foot. But we did really enjoy the peaceful feeling that came from being in an area that had lots of walking trails, lots of cycling trails as well. Yeah, that was like kind of our overall impression. You would still see people walking and talking and enjoying company, but there's just like, I guess, this different feeling where no one's blasting music on like their phone or like a speaker, but those were like our first impressions.
Yeah, I feel like the playgrounds were some of the most bustling areas,
Hmm.
especially in Grafenwehr. They have an amazing playground there. And it was just, yeah, it felt very peaceful. I think that's a good way to put it. More quiet, slower paced. I feel like that's where we started to just like feel the environment and just get a sense of that slower paced lifestyle that we had heard about in Europe, but now we're like experiencing firsthand. And I think it did in some ways make us realize how busy our lives were back in the States. It was just refreshing to have made the decision to leave in Germany and in a sense be forced to have it be a slower pace. Although we were really missing family, they weren't there. And so it was really just the three of us. We could give our attention to each other in full. And I do think that was nice.
Yeah, I do think it was a good slowdown. It really gave us a chance to, I think, find out so much more about ourselves, as we'll continue to talk about throughout our whole time overseas. One thing that it's important for me to talk about and us to bring up is not everything was perfect, of course. There were a lot of adjustments that we were still getting used to. We were obviously finally adjusted to the time change after a few weeks, and the whole new environment of just like being away from family was something new. And in the same breath, I didn't really talk about this at all with anyone really outside of my family. During about the 2 month mark of us being there, it was a really tough time for me. And I don't even know how to, I guess, really explain the thoughts and the feelings besides maybe worry and maybe I would say a bit of anxiety inducing feelings. I don't know. I mean, there were lots of times where I would just be not hysterically crying, but I would just be filled with so much emotion and worry and anxiety that I eventually booked an appointment with a therapist, I remember, and talking with her just about this is a huge change for you. You're overseas with your young family, like you're away from your support system, and these are all like new things. Like it's going to just get better as you like get adjusted to the new life. And so yeah, that was a difficult time. I honestly just think it was a lot of changes all at once. And then I think the reality settling in that this is new and uncomfortable and it's not just a 6 month travel thing. This is like my new job. I hope that it works out for my family. The added pressure, self-imposed and just in general from the position that like all came together. And I would even say that at some point it felt maybe what I would consider what depression feels like because I don't know if I fully know what that like entails, but it's the closest thing that I would say I kind of ran into a bout of a little bit of a depression and anxiety at that point. Thankfully, that didn't last too long. Honestly, it was a few weeks, which is still very difficult to experience. Soon after that, the weather started changing. It was longer days, it was warmer temperatures. We were getting to do things outside that I enjoyed more, and we were moving into our house. Even during that transition stage, that was still hard. I remember, even when we had got into the house, there were still some nights and days that were mentally and emotionally draining. That's something I didn't really talk about ever during any of the videos because I was still figuring it out. And who knows, maybe it would have helped to talk about it because then other people could have related to it. If you're ever going through like a big change, a big move or a new job or whatever, and you're having those feelings of separation or anxiety or whatever, like I didn't want to talk about it too much at the time because I didn't really know how to talk about it. But I think it benefited as I talked about it. It was more therapeutic over time.
Yeah, I feel like as we've done the international moves, I mean, we've done three big ones now. We've come to find a bit of like a theme, and it is that at the first, you're kind of in the honeymoon stage. Like the first month, month and a half, 2 months even, can be such a high because everything is new, everything is exciting. You feel so small in this big world, and we love that. But then, as a honeymoon stage does, you kind of get adjusted to the reality. Then you get like smacked with doubt of what did I do? Because now not everything's new. Now it's just a normal part of life and it's different and it's hard and it comes with new challenges and adjustments. And I feel like that has been kind of common even in Japan, even here in Italy as well. Like we have a high and then there's kind of that low.
I think it's like a cycle, right? They come and go in waves. You said it very well. I think we hit that point where it was the reality really settling in. Like, you know that you're moving, you know that you're doing all these big changes, but then the everyday becomes more normal, and then you're faced to hit that reality, you
And I
know?
do think with you being more of the patriarch of the home, I'm using quotes here for those that are listening because we grew up in a religion and an LDS culture where the man, as per the family proclamation, which is like a document the church leaders have came out, like your role is to provide for your family. And we moved here for your job. So there, I feel like naturally was this added pressure.
Yeah, 100%. That was a contributing factor of like the stress of making sure that like I was performing up to the level I needed to be so that we could stay here. And in general, like, what if I hate it here and like we have to move again? Like, that's a huge ask for you. Not to mention like the financial side of things because of contract time limits and whatever. I wanted to be sure that what we had done was going to be able to like set us up for success and also allow us to have the type of life and the experience that we wanted. The whole reason we came over, you know, to have that experience. There was added pressure for it.
Plus, we have a baby. You know, Willa's 1 at this point, but she's 1 in 3 months. It just requires a lot of time and attention in general. Any child does. Our bodies are in a different state of stress during those 3 pre-move and 3 post-move because you're making so many decisions and planning and thinking about so many things at once.
Yeah. Well
So
said. At this point, we'll transition into our next big stage of Germany. I moved overseas working as a health and safety officer, industrial hygiene. My job was with the Army base in Germany. So the US Army is who I worked for. And that was the whole reason why we were able to move overseas. Different than so many other people, but also similar to a lot of military families. Being a civilian, it came with a little bit more flexibility and it was fully our choice to apply. We definitely were really excited. So for those of you who didn't know, that's a little bit background there. You have to find housing in this commuting area within 30 minutes of the job.
the house hunting thing, we were fairly naive. Tanner got a contact for a real estate company, and we went and looked at a couple houses with this agency. And honestly, they were older German houses. We were seeing retro style kitchens and bathrooms. Do you remember that?
Like 7 different colors of tile in the house between the bathroom, kitchen, and stuff. And they, don't get me wrong, they have character. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, we love some of the characteristics that we've seen from even Italian, Japanese, and German homes.
It was really fun to see, but I don't think we envisioned these places as a place for us. And they weren't. So really, you're only supposed to live in your temporary housing for 3 months. So there's kind of a timeline of like, you got to find a place and be moved out by the end of the 3 months. And with COVID, some of that time was taken away just because we couldn't even leave. So we were feeling quite a bit of pressure. However, we got, I would say, very lucky with our German house because we didn't even find it through a real estate agent. It was word of mouth. We saw like a couple pictures and we were like, looks okay. I remember not feeling like this was probably going to be the place, but we pull up to do a tour and it was
Beautiful rolling
Yes.
fields, and the house was incredibly beautiful. Be sure to go ahead and check that video out. That is one that we will include because that was like a shock for us, and we knew within 2 minutes of being in the property that we wanted to rent it.
we moved in the end of May, or was it June?
It was May, mid-May.
Okay, in May. And so things are starting to become a little greener. June is one of my favorite months in Germany because it is beautiful. And so we move in and we had seen it when it was kind of gray and cloudy, but then we're getting to experience it with beautiful weather. It was instant confirmation. It was just so peaceful. And we were surrounded by a lot of nature. It kind of felt like home growing up, probably especially for you, being around farms and fields, and an extra level of it because we were so close to a forest in our backyard.
We would just go on walks, and we would have like a hilltop walk, we'd have forest walk. Honestly, it was everything we needed to have easy access to not busy roads, trails. You could go running, ride bikes, go to a park, and it was like there. I would say the only thing that would have been better was if we had maybe stores closer, but you can't have both.
Yeah, and it was a little bit further away from base. A lot of Americans were actually driving further, but a lot of Americans stayed the opposite direction as us. There were Germans all around us, and Willa was the only American in her school, in her kita. So it was helpful for us because a lot of the other Americans I talked to were like, your daughter is in a German school. How did you get that? It's so rare for an American to be able to put their child in a German one. It just doesn't happen. And we thankfully chose a community where it was small and there wasn't that competition.
And the timing was right where she was able to get in.
We'll talk about that a little bit later. But yes, that's how we found our house. We loved our house. It was perfect fit for us.
In one of our YouTube videos, we shared how we shipped our car from the States and then eventually got it in Germany before we moved into our house, which was very helpful to go and see the house and to move stuff and for me to get to work. But that also meant that with only one car, you were pretty isolated, right? Especially for the first few months, it was just you and Willa at home. And you would just walk to the playground. And honestly, for the first while, I would go to work and I would come home and you would leave like the house like once or twice a week besides going on walks.
I don't know how long we were in that scenario for, 6, 7 months, where
Yeah.
we only had one car. So you can imagine me with Willa. She's 1.5 at this point. And looking back, there's some of my fondest memories because we would just go on an outing to the playground and we'd walk there. And life was very slow. And to be honest, I started to have feelings of isolation, which looking back, I'm like, that completely makes sense. I don't even have a way and a means to go out if I wanted to. I couldn't just go to the grocery store if I wanted to get out.
And I think it was a little bit different compared to other communities that we had been in as well. I'm talking Japan and Italy. We weren't part of active Facebook groups or community groups within the American community.
And it was COVID, like we've mentioned many times. We did meet someone in temporary housing, and she actually did come to our house, and we tried to meet up, but there just wasn't a lot of communication going on. And because it had only been a couple months since leaving, I don't feel like I felt social deprivation. I was still contacting family a lot. We would do a lot of FaceTimes and stay in touch quite regularly. So it wasn't like I felt like I just needed to go and make a lot of friends. I just needed to feel like I had the freedom to be able to go out beyond walking.
That's well said. Eventually, I bought a 310 series BMW 2001 or something like that. I do remember that even then you would go out maybe one more time during the week than you actually could, but it was the idea and the knowledge knowing that you could go whenever that just mentally made it easier.
Yeah, a lot of my time in Germany was fairly like homebody-esque. Through church, we were able to create some friends, and that was really great. And I felt like the cups were being filled. Our social cup through the church friends was kind of enough. And then as Willa started going to school, our German community became larger, and that was a great social outlet. We weren't feeling deprived because we had just came from a very social setting with our families all around. Our focus was like moving, getting adjusted, and then travel. And thankfully, that started to happen and COVID restrictions started to lessen as the summer came.
Yeah, that was really like the kickstart of our traveling time in Germany. We started local, going to Bamberg. We went to Rothenburg, Ob der Taube, which we called it Rothenburg at first. And even today, we probably don't get it all right, but we were starting to learn so many things and getting great feedback from people on our YouTube videos, but then also getting to experience like street food, like Döner, like the pommes. And that was the first time we saw Spargel, which is white asparagus. It's kind of a thing in Germany. Just really getting to experience a lot of those cultural things by traveling and then getting to see different places that have lots of history. For us, it was cool to go and see churches and castles and things that were thousands or hundreds of years older than anything we had ever really experienced in the States as far as like man-made structures.
Yeah, and then we also had some amazing interactions with some locals. So we toured Amberg. One of our YouTube followers had reached out to us and said that they'd give us a tour. We actually have a YouTube video, and she's was okay with being in the YouTube video. We got to meet Katie, and we still stay in contact with her, actually. That was one of our first German friends, and to be able to meet them in person was just so fun for us. She speaks English amazingly well, but she grew up German. And so we could ask her so many questions about what Germans are like, and to be able to have an insider to like how it was growing up in Germany was so, so cool.
Yeah, meeting up with Katie was really fun. She helped us like with our pronunciation and helping us like understand, I guess, like the structure of like cities and like really helping us understand just like common things about Germany. And one thing that we were learning during this experience, and people told us on YouTube, and we even experienced it firsthand, was Germans are private initially, but once you make friends with them, they really become like lifelong friends. And it's very genuine. So although small talk might be harder to break through with, we definitely have found out that our German friends who we've met with and, you know, we're able to be hosted by or hosted them, those are some of like our most consistent communications that we have with them. And it's really special to realize that the connection goes deeper.
Yeah, looking back, I'm proud of us for putting ourselves out there to, accept an offer to be able to go meet with a stranger, go to a new place and learn so much. But I'm also such awe that people are willing to just be so friendly, to be willing to let us stay at their accommodation. Literally in Berlin, someone let us stay in their bed. They had went with their partner and left their whole entire apartment for us to stay in. And I'm like, gosh, like there's such good people around the world. Like I know it's not just Germans that are willing to do this, but in our scenario, that was a lot of our experience. I wish we would have been able to take up all the offers that we were given. Like I can't stress enough, the community, our YouTube community, which was largely Germans, were just so kind and welcoming. It felt like we had so many friends cheering us on to help make our transition. I'm surprised I'm getting emotional, but I think it meant a lot to the three of us to feel like we had strangers out there cheering for us.
Family that we didn't really know about in one way or another. Yeah.
So we were already going in like feeling that support, but then to meet some of them, it just became deeper. And it felt so genuine.
And it goes for almost any country that we've been to. There are some amazing individuals out there, but those were definitely some of our lasting impressions that we've had of Germans. Sure, there might be some crunchy, angry, grumpy Germans out there too, and we definitely have had comments on both sides of the spectrum on our YouTube channel. But the overwhelming feeling of support and love from Germany is the one that we always leave the impression with.
So we're here in the summertime, we're starting to travel, and boy, this summer did we travel. I wrote down a list of some of the places we went to in that summer, and I'm just going to list some of it out. We went to Fusen and Neuschwanstein Castle. We went to Austria when we were there, across the border. Then on a different trip, we went to Black Forest for your birthday. We went to Munich, Germany. Then we went to Croatia. That's where our bags were stolen. And we went to Plitvice National Park, a must for us to go back to sometime.
Yes.
We went to Greece over the 4th of July, and we went to Iceland. At this point, we're trying to do some of our big travel trips before Willa turns 2, because we don't want to have to pay for a third person's flight.
Yeah, we hit the ground running and we loved it. Honestly, it was kind of a lot. I will say I was more of like the whole let's slow it down. Like we've got a lot of time here. And you're like, we've only got 2 more summers after this.
Yeah, if we're only going to be here for 3 years, it's like, let's take advantage of especially the summertime.
Yeah, I totally get it. We for sure did. And if we're talking about like our YouTube channel, we had a lot of following and a lot of traction, honestly, because of all the cultural things that we were sharing about. So we did recognize quite a bit difference when we would post about like going to other countries within Europe or even other areas outside of Germany, that people weren't as interactive on those videos as they were about like driving on the Autobahn or going to a bakery or such. But we truly felt like we wanted a well-rounded experience with a blend of travel and culture rather than chasing the views. And we recognized that, sure, we wouldn't have as much views, but deep down, we were trying to stick true to like what we wanted and what we wanted to experience versus chasing views.
Yeah, I remember a lot of those conversations that we had of like, what do we really want out of our channel? Because we've seen success in the cultural side of things, but what we went into it thinking was to document our family travels. There's just not time to travel when you first move, you know? So we were just documenting our lives, and people loved that insight. And I love that we also have it documented. But the idea was more of like a travel vlog. So I am proud of us for doing what aligned with what we wanted rather than, like you said, chasing the views. And it was difficult. I was the one doing a lot of the editing and the one running a lot of the YouTube stuff. So when views started to go down, like even now, I'm kind of sad our Iceland videos haven't been viewed as much because they were amazing.
Some of our favorite videos and footage have been from our travel stuff, and they are among the lowest hitting videos.
It totally depends on your preference, and we want people watching because they want to watch the videos, of course. It just was like, if only like the algorithm worked for our travel videos as well as our cultural ones, because that would have been ideal. In the end, we were just happy our videos were getting viewed. Like we did not expect our channel to take off the way that we did. So even to have a video that had 10,000 views, that was a very low number for us at the time, but it was still like 10,000 people are interested in watching us. Like, honestly, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it is mind-blowing, especially when you go to think about what 10,000 people look like if you were to be in a stadium, let alone videos that have 250,000 or whatever. So as we're talking about traveling, one big aspect for us is this is our first time really traveling with like a toddler. We're flying in airplanes, we're doing like longer road trips, and yeah, we just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Willa honestly was a really great traveler. We distinctly even remember on like our really long road trip to Croatia, it was like a 10 to 12 hour drive to get there. she was like self-entertaining for a lot of it.
I don't think we put any screens in front of her because we really, really tried hard to not even introduce a screen until she was 2. And even then, we were really aware of it. But I think she was reading books and, yeah, taking naps.
Reading, but watching,
yeah,
looking
looking
at
at
pictures.
I do remember she just like tossed them over, and we had a huge stack of books, and that was what she did.
Yeah, she did really great. And we would definitely take pauses and get out and stretch. But we were very surprised, specifically with that trip, of like how well she did. And just in general, Willa really did enjoy being out and exploring, and probably fed off of our energy that we would take along with us. So it just, I think it translated.
She was just so young when she started traveling that that's what she's going to remember. That is her normal, like going on weekend trips and traveling. And so she did become accustomed to like longer road trips. I would say traveling on flights was more difficult with Willa. Every kid is going to have their preferences, whether they like books or songs or stories, you know. Please do not compare, because honestly, if people ask for our advice, like, what are traveling tips with kids? I always say, like, you just do it. I don't really have many, but a flight, even if it's an international flight that say is 12 hours, it's a long time, but like, you just do it. You just make it happen. I feel like we're just going to have to do a future podcast episode about traveling with kids, because how old the kid is really determines the tips or tricks that we would even share.
We definitely remember many difficult times with sleeping. And we just, like you said, we had to make it happen. We had to choose that it was worth going through some of those rougher moments for the memory, for the experience, for the food, for the hike or whatever.
Yeah, for us, either way, we're going to be parenting, right? Like, Willa's always going to be there. So would I rather parent at home in a weekend in our own comfort space that has its advantages? Or would I rather be parenting on a trip in Iceland or Greece or wherever?
Where it's going to be very similar, like tantrums happen at both places. Nap times sometimes happen or don't happen at both places. And sometimes it is easier to be away from like your everyday things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's teaching Willa a lot. Even though she's young, she's getting exposed to so much. Of course, there's a learning curve for all of us, but we did it. Sometimes we were just so exhausted, but still would rather be exhausted traveling than not traveling at all.
Yeah, and we look back at how much we learned about Germany, how much we learned about Europe during all that time. Obviously, she doesn't remember a lot of it, but we have the memories of it now. And even yesterday, before we were going to bed, she asked to hear like a funny story about when she was growing up. And I told her about one in her German house, and then I told her about the one in Greece where she was like so cute and little and wanting to chase the cats and saying meow, meow, meow. And like, she doesn't remember that, but like, we have that memory to be able to share with her.
If you're worried about traveling with kids, there's a part where I'm saying that is a rightful worry, because it does demand more energy. If you listen to our backpacking podcast episode, our travel looked entirely different than it does now with kids, but there's still so much meaning in both. I totally understand and respect people who are like, I'm not going to be doing a lot of traveling when I have young kids. Fully respect that. For us, we would rather travel with our kids, and we'd rather be more tired and rather have those harder moments to still do that.
And our hope, and what we have seen as well, is that it's easier when your kids are used to it. It gives them the opportunity and the ability to be like, there is so much diversity out there and so much ability to explore that they're used to it, versus if you never did travel until they're 8, 9, or 10, then they turn out to hating it, then it just makes it more difficult.
Yeah, I feel like it's just like hiking. If you teach them how to start hiking when they're young, they're going to naturally be better and able to go further and hike more when they're older.
They might not always like it. You know, we have our ups and downs of stages even now with our kids, but we definitely know we've had some amazing success hikes because we've exposed them to it.
Yeah, there was something I was going to say with it, and then with the hiking.
So talking about parenting, one thing we realized as we were interacting with other parents at Perkita, and just like within like Germany itself, was the style of German parenting. We had grown up seeing our siblings and our aunts and uncles like raising kids, and obviously our parents raising us. There is a noticeable difference between how parents in Germany interact and treat their kids compared to Americans, and I would even say Italians, and in some ways I would even say Japanese as well. Germans tend to like let the kids be more autonomous, and they allow them to figure things out. And I've noticed, not with all German kids, but with a lot of German kids, they seem like they're more confident at trying new things without like reaching out for help. Now, that does not mean that they don't still reach out for help, especially if they're doing something that they feel scared with. But playgrounds, for example, the playgrounds just seemed more risky. Something that in the States we talked about several times, like somebody would get sued over this playground in the States because some parent would have their kid be playing on it and the kid would maybe fall off and broke a bone or something like that. These playgrounds were designed to push kids and their limits and allow them to be more pushing the boundaries, I guess, in some ways.
Which is so good for learning, for coordination. And here in Italy, we have found some good playgrounds, but they don't compare to the best ones we were finding in Germany. We miss that, especially when we moved to Japan. We'll talk about that a later time. Because we had such a young child, it was nice to see how German style parenting was. So we could kind of take it and put it to practice rather than like have to self-correct. We were seeing and taking things that we wanted to. So that's what we've tried to do. I would say parenting in Italy is very, very different. I think overall it has made us be a little more calmer, less controlling, and I am grateful for Germany and that exposure.
Absolutely. Me too. Not saying that we don't have our imperfections and tendencies based off of how we were raised and stuff. We have talked a lot about how even like how I parent, you parent, like whether pro or con of how we were raised has like shaped like the types of parents that we want to become. And it's always a work in progress, but we're definitely grateful for that time we had.
So after the summer travels were done, in October, we had unexpected news that my uncle had passed away from COVID, actually. So we had no plans to travel back to the States, especially not this soon after moving. But we decided we wanted to be there for family. Willow was still not 2. So that was, I think, one of the reasons as well, is it's going to be more affordable for us to go just pay for 2 tickets. And that trip just became much more than we expected. We ended up catching COVID ourselves, and then we couldn't go on our flight. It was just a whirlwind, to say.
The support that we were able to go and to connect with your family was meaningful and it was special. Probably wasn't the smartest thing to do because we got infected, possibly got other people infected. Thankfully, we all recovered well. But yeah, it was a really difficult or harsh reality to face during that time.
But we ended up coming back. We eventually got back to Germany and we savored being back. I feel like that's one of the things that visiting family in the States always does for us is if we're feeling homesick, it fills that void up. And then we get back to our home. Now it was in Germany and we loved being home. I think at that point we really started to feel like Germany was our home. And I think we saw that just by visiting.
Yeah, we really settled into a good rhythm. We were starting to get like a bigger friend, especially when Willa started at Kita. Soon after, we had our first Christmas there, cutting down a Christmas tree, cooking a Christmas goose, which we nailed, by the way.
Thanks to the German recipe card at the local goose farm.
But our whole experience in Germany, especially coming back, like you said, we just felt like we were coming home. And that was like a good confirmation feeling to have after going back, having a few reverse culture shocks, going back to the States, and then coming back and just feeling really content with like where we were.
Our Christmas was so magical. I loved it so much. That was probably my favorite Christmas we've had since being abroad up to this point, because on Christmas Day, it was snowing in our backyard. We were able to like build a snowman over Christmas break. We cut down our own Christmas tree at a local Christmas tree farm. Like, how picturesque is that? It was just like quiet and quaint. And like, that's all we needed though.
And it was memorable because we grew up with snow during the holiday season. And so like to have our kid who's old enough to like walk and run around at this point and fully experience it. She had just turned 2, you know. Yeah, it was a very special Christmas and one that like we fully enjoyed being together. And not to mention that was our first experience of Christmas markets.
The magical European Christmas markets. We fell in love with them. We went back to Rothenburg because it's such a quaint, beautiful German town and it was decorated very quintessential. Is that the word?
I don't know.
Very beautiful. That's where we had some like amazing hot chocolate. Germany Christmas is really magical. It just like, yeah, gets you in the feels. So that was really fun. And like you said, Willa was 2 at this point. Our baby girl is growing up. And in that fall, we had called to put her on a wait list to join her German Kita. We felt like this would be a good move for both myself and Willa. I had read statistics, I remember, that like at the age of 2, that's the age where kids need to have social exposures outside of home. Really up until that point, if they don't have much, it's okay. They just really need to be with their parents. And so I was like, we are abroad. we're not having a ton of other social interactions. We knew for the language exposure, it would be huge for her and her brain development. But just in general, for her to make friends, it was time. And it would also be beneficial for me to not have to work and do YouTube while she was home, or to not have to do it in the late hours, because I tried not to do it when she was there. So just as a stay-at-home parent, those are the difficulties that I feel like anyone faces if they're working from home. But she went.
She went for a hybrid session over the first little bit where you and I would take turns going there and spending like an hour or two with her in her little class because she's so young. They definitely were like, we need you guys to like help us get through this. And it was a good eye-opening experience, to say the least. She definitely missed being with us, and it was hard for her. I remember you saying, this is tearing my heart apart, like seeing how sad she was at times. I think that was because she had spent nearly every waking moment with you, and you didn't have a whole lot of time away from her. She didn't really have any cousins around or any other friends to see around to go there, so she was starting with new faces. And it didn't help that the ladies, they were older, and she has, I think, a little age of phobia.
Ageism or something.
Yeah, she definitely had a tendency to like younger caretakers or teachers. Every now and then there was like a substitute or a shadowing teacher that was there that was probably in her early 30s. And she would be more content on those days compared to when the mid 50s, mid 60s teachers were there.
Yeah, it was fun for us to go and have that exposure, though. They would have free open play time, and then they would go and do songs and show pictures and like their little circle time. And I mean, it's all in German. She only went for half days, but yeah, it was really hard to leave your first baby in a foreign country when you know she's not understanding the language, as she's like yelling, crying, and to walk away. That is hard. That's a hard moment, especially for me where I'm like, I don't have to do this. I'm choosing to because I think it's worth it. But right now, it's not really feeling worth it because right now it's hard.
Yeah, but we do look back at it, and although it was very difficult, she eventually caught on, and it was a few weeks later that she would finally be able to go there more calm.
Yeah, maybe without crying every time. Honestly, it wasn't until she moved up into the next class where I think she really started to feel comfortable. So she was going to her German kita for like 5 months. Even saying that out loud, I'm like, oh, that was hard. Where she didn't love it. She got used to it, and it wasn't as many tears and fights, you know, to get her dressed or to go. But it did take time.
And I will say that in the end, it was worth it because she was so much more prepared for the next one. And she made some friends in the younger class so that when she did move up into the next class, she was able to continue those friendships. And she had a younger teacher, which I think helped.
Yeah.
They did bigger age games and activities, which I think was helpful because she naturally, I think, was ready for those next games and activities.
Willa always feels more comfortable, I think, when there's older kids rather than younger. Yeah, that move was a great thing. And then it was like night and day difference. We weren't trying to motivate her. She was wanting to go to school and she was creating friends. And she did create a little bestie. She still talks about her German friend. They would go to each other's houses and celebrate their birthdays. And that was her first best friend.
It was like a special moment because, yeah, last night she was even telling me that she misses her and wants to go visit her. It would be fun at some point when we're relatively close compared to where we were in Japan to make that happen. But yeah, a very special memory and ultimately great opportunity for us to like rub shoulders with other parents, get to know more about the community.
Yeah, that was the push that we needed to be more integrated in the community because otherwise we just didn't have a lot of reasons for that. And our village was like a village with 6 other houses, you know? So it was a great thing for us. No regrets. And I do think in the end, it helped me to feel way more confident about our kids' abilities and any kid's ability. If you're a parent that has gone through this or is going through this or is contemplating putting their child into an activity or something that feels uncomfortable, I would say trust them because kids are very resilient and kids are adaptable and they're smart. And one of the main messages we took away is that if we show confidence and trust in Willa, she will feel that. So it was really important for us during those moments to be like, you can do this, and to show her that we knew she could do it. And I think that's something we've tried to instill in a lot of different things.
So shifting gears away from like childcare with the starting of the classes, We also jumped into some cultural experiences, quite literally. We went to a few concentration camps because, like, well, Americans typically learn about geography through wars and stuff, and we definitely did. It was a very touching experience, very eye-opening. Additionally, at this time, we went to the nude saunas, which we've talked about on several occasions. That's one of the videos that we'll link below as well. We were just kind of putting ourselves out there to go and experience being in like a mixed sauna with a bunch of other naked people. We want to do this because we know it's like a part of like the culture here. But nude bodies have been sexualized our entire lives. And, you know, we don't know these people. I guess in some ways that was kind of nice because we didn't know anybody and we figured we would never see anybody again there.
Yeah, I think that helped me a lot is them being strangers. Finding out that Germans go to the saunas with their families was like a strange thing for me to hear because that would never be a thing, you know, in our families, maybe divided by genders and sex, but to go in a mixed sauna with male and female would feel uncomfortable if I had my dad there.
Well,
You
yeah,
know?
and it would be vice versa. Like, I don't feel like it would be the same experience. Like my brothers or like my dad, for sure. But yeah, it'd be weird the other way around, in my opinion. Just because that's how we grew up. I've even been to the sauna with my good German friend, and like it wasn't weird.
I think after having those experiences, it doesn't have to be weird if you don't make it weird. And I feel like Germans are so good at just not making it weird because it's culturally not taboo and it's been normalized. And being a female, having grown up the way that I did in a very patriarchal community, religion, I was taught from a very young age how to cover my body. So it was, I would say, even more monumental for me than maybe for you.
I would agree. I think it touched you more than me.
I feel like at that point, I wasn't fully comfortable with my body because, like I said, I was just kind of always taught of how to cover it up. It did feel very freeing, like you said, to just go and be and not be fixated on my body. Like I could experience it with no clothes, but not be worried about how I looked. And especially being nude in public. Like I'd never had that experience. So I think I went in feeling like I'd probably be hyper fixated and anxious about how my body looks, but it didn't. Yeah, it just felt nice. And I think that really like built the foundation of like a healthier perspective of like how to look at my body and how to experience my body in a non-sexualized way, of how to see other people's bodies, female and male, with wrinkles, with saggy skin, with all sorts of different shapes and sizes of bodies. It's normal to age. It's normal to not have a perfect body. And it's okay to just like your body. And it's okay to feel comfortable in your body. Thankfully, I would say me growing up, I was fairly confident in my body compared to even other individuals in our communities, but it was still that impactful. I'm just so happy we went. I wish we could have went more. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of individuals to watch Willis, so date nights were such a rarity, but we did fall in love with the sauna culture.
Yeah, I think it was very impactful for both of us. And even though, yes, like we're not going to deny, like we have 2 kids, of course, like bodies are meant to make love, be able to make families and stuff. But like it's also bodies are for so much more than that. To be in an environment around other people who are there to take care of their bodies, their mental health as well, sweat out all of whatever they need to. It's just like a really grounding experience, I would say, to be in an area you're not talking to anyone and you just get to go there and you get to relax and you get to go from hot temperatures to cold temperatures. And I think you get to really feel grounded because it's literally you're naked, you're exposed. And I think you get to also have some internal reflection when you're vulnerable like that.
And the thing that was so incredibly impactful for me was to be able to be naked, but not be worried about how other people were perceiving my nakedness, because that was always a thing. Like I was taught to wear shorts that would, go at least to my knees so that the adult men that came to girls camp wouldn't be tempted, or, I had to like have certain rules of modesty because of how other people would think, to be able to realize that it wasn't me. It wasn't what I wore. It was how other people were thinking. That was the problem. It was like, I can be free in my body. I can wear what feels good and what feels comfortable. I think that's when I realized, like, my body's not just here to be viewed, Like, I can be naked and people next to me aren't looking. I mean, maybe they're looking, but they're not staring. Like we're all just there having this experience and it feels very like unifying, not in like a crazy level or way. It's just like you're all nude and you're all exposed and you're all vulnerable. For me, it was just, yeah, it was very deep.
And I think that setting creates this feeling that someone can say, I am imperfectly perfect in so many ways because of who I am. And although I might not have the world's perfect physique or the flattest skin or the whatever, it's so much more than that.
Yeah, I feel like since then, I was so much more confident in whatever swimsuit I was wearing, whether it was a full piece or a bikini. I was able to not be as fixated on how I looked in it. I wear a swimsuit because I'm at the beach and I want to enjoy the beach experience. And when I'm not worried about myself, I'm not even worried about other people. Like, it's such a nice thing because over time, the more and more you have this practice, and I do think some of it takes a mental practice, it just creates a healthier mental perspective. And I do think you're really able to enjoy it. That is all I want for our girls,
Yeah.
is to have that confidence and to not feel that pressure and to see the diversity of bodies in general.
Yeah. I know this doesn't vibe with everybody. Some people are never getting onto this. And I know people who lived in Germany, we've heard people, they're like, oh, I never would go. You would not catch me going to one of those, even if I didn't know anyone. But I think for us, it was really freeing. I will have to say that that has shaped so much of like our current attitude towards it. And one other aspect that's very freeing is the amount of headspace that doesn't have to be taking on of judging other people for like what they wear in general, but like what they wear at like the beach. Because we grew up so hyper focused on modesty. For me, it was like, well, the girls need to cover up. And for you, it was like, I need to cover up for the boys because, well, you don't want to have tempting thoughts or impure thoughts. So that's been really freeing for me as well because I don't have the judgment anymore that I used to carry if someone was wearing a bikini or if someone was like wearing a more risque outfit, if you want to say it. But it's one of those things that again mentally it does free up so much space for yourself. And I think it gives you more compassion for people because you're no longer judging them on like their appearance.
As you can tell, like there's a lot that we could say about this. And I think in future podcast episodes, we'll definitely come back to beauty culture, to the sauna experience, like how all of this is integrated, especially with our childhoods and just the way that we grew up and how our perspectives were and how they've changed. But it really did start this process of viewing things in a different way. And for the better.
Now that we've talked about kind of a heavier topic about nudity, it seems kind of fitting to just roll into how religion, like where we were at this point, because that obviously was part of how we were shaped growing up.
I love that it's like nudity and religion, but like you're right, it is all intertwined clearly, and it has like affected us emotionally, mentally,
Physically.
spiritually. Did we clock all those?
I think we got them all.
So, when we first moved to Germany, it took us a couple weeks to actually attend the first ward in Germany, but it was something that we didn't really ask if we were going to do. Like, we just kind of knew that's what we were going to do.
I will chime in here. Ward is the term for Mormon congregations. So it's not like a psychiatric ward. It's not like a mental institute.
Yeah.
We're legit talking about the community where we go to church at. And it happened to be very close to where we were staying, right next to the base. And I think it was because, well, we were adjusting to time, quarantine, and eventually, yeah, we did make it and we started attending regularly.
This church building was mostly filled with Americans. I think there were like 2 to 3 actual local Germans that had like translating devices if they didn't speak English. So honestly, it just felt like we were going to church in the States.
Yeah, which was a good thing, I think, because we were able to, I guess, make community with people who spoke the same language. We were able to kind of bridge like this gap rather than fully going to like, say, a German church. And although at some ways I think it would have been very interesting for us to go to church in a German speaking ward, I think it was very beneficial for just the impact of what we had during our first few weeks and months.
And I say that it was like us going to church in the States, but honestly, most of the members had ties to Utah. Most Mormons do because that's where the headquarters of the church are. So there were a lot of like cultural norms. I feel like going to church was the place that felt the most like being back in Utah.
And it felt most like that because the lessons, the messages, everything is standardized. And like you go in any church building on any given Sunday, they follow the same lesson pattern and structure. So if you hadn't gone to your same one, you would still have the same lesson. But more importantly, it was the mannerism, it was the culture, the types of words that they used. The entire environment felt similar. I will say one aspect that we did really enjoy was it seemed that there was less pressure because everyone was transient. Everyone was there for 2 to 3 years and then they would move on. So longtime members had been there for like 4 years or whatever.
Yeah, there was much more acceptance for being gone on the weekends. Everyone was traveling because they were all trying to take advantage of the opportunity to live in Europe. And so that I feel like wasn't as big of a thing of like, oh no, the Christiansons, they weren't at church. Why?
There was this flexibility given that no one was there permanently, and it was kind of freeing and relaxing. So we attended church. At this point, we were still very much in the thought and the feeling of like, this is where we want to be. This is where we want to maintain structure of our religious beliefs. But then I would say as we traveled and we experienced time in Germany, this really opened up our mind, forced us to ask the question. We are seeing thousands of other people in different communities, cultures who have structure in a different religion or without religion. And we were always taught that the gospel was the way that you found happiness. That was the way that you were able to have a happy family and experience true happiness. That was like a quote that was used so many times. People can be happy, but they can't have true happiness outside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I feel like a lot of our spirituality came with a lot of structure, like you said. So, church attendance, callings, commandments, all of these things, which we talked about in our second podcast episode, like we talked about our childhoods leading up to high school and how a lot of them were formed. Structure played a really big parts of our adolescence and like formative teenage years because we are going to all of these activities and we're starting to hold callings. Those were always very, very closely tied together, if not like equal, like spirituality is doing these things. So then when we're living abroad and we're seeing what seemed to be very healthy marriages, happy kids, and overall just like a German family that is well balanced and experiencing joy, what looks like true joy and happiness, it's almost unavoidable to not notice for one, but then to also ask like, well, if these were the things we always had to do to have this, they're not doing those same things, but they have the end product. So is this the one correct truth, the right truth, or was it just our normal?
I think that's well said. We had experienced that our whole lives. We had seen so many people live what seemed to be happy, full lives. Like, I genuinely feel that that's the way for so many of our family members before, and even those who are still there. I genuinely believe that they experience the true happiness that they need. I really do. Like you said, it does force you to at least reflect about and think about it when you take a step back and say, okay, how many other people are able to find whatever this true happiness, this balance, this meaning of life, or just in general being able to contribute to a society and feel like they are making the most of being a person alive? It just makes you like really reflect that. And at this point, this was probably the first time in both of our lives where we sat down and seriously like wrestled with these thoughts and feelings. What would be like 4 years later, right? Like we would continue to do this all the way through our time in Germany to Japan. And even here, we're still navigating a lot of those areas. But I would say that during this time in Germany, it did cause us to ask questions, to be more inquisitive. And I think part of it also has to do with the fact that we were asking questions about the states. We were asking questions about like how we wanted to be parents and how governments and societies operate differently than what our normal was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our normal that we always thought was the right way religiously, even the
America's the best mindset.
like the propaganda in America, like you definitely get a little bit of this entitlement to then, be in a new environment to be like, oh, wait, hold on. It's like almost frustrating to have these realizations of like, wow, other people are doing for one really well and doing it differently. And their way kind of seems a little better or maybe a little healthier, talking religiously.
It's like asking some of those difficult questions about if there was a higher power as a God, like we had been taught within Mormonism, who loves all of his children, and the gospel and the restored priesthood is the way that all of those children are blessed and can be with their families forever, well, then why is it that only 15, 16, 17 million people alive today and 8 billion people are alive? Think about how just interesting that sounds and feels. And I will say that for those people who maybe are apologists for the church or who would defend that statement, they would say, well, that's why we have temple work and that's why we have missionaries to like share the restored gospel. I fully believe that. I lived that as a missionary. We lived that as doing baptisms for the dead. But it doesn't take away the fact that the question has to be begged: if we truly believe X, Y, and Z, all loving, unconditional love from a heavenly parent or parents, then why are there only a select less than 1% of the current people alive today, not to mention the billions of people who lived without it during their time? Like, it just doesn't, that's just one of the many pillars that we started to like ask.
Yeah, and at this point, we were hardly questioning anything. It was more just like the recognition and the differences, like I said, is really unavoidable if you're living abroad. I would assume even unavoidable if you're living outside of the Utah bubble that we were. Like to go live in California, you'd see people living all different kinds of lifestyles. However, I feel like in a way, you're just kind of taught that you kind of have these opportunities to be a missionary and like teach them the gospel because you don't live in Utah. So like you're kind of in the mission field in a sense, you know? And so you still feel like the knowledge that you have is that the gospel is the one true church. And it's a message that a lot of people want to share with love and with joy and with light because it means so much to them. And there's so many good intentions with that. If you listen to our podcast, you'll say when we talk about religion, we always try and be incredibly respectful. That's so important to us. We know how, especially Tanner, he served a mission, like we know how that feels to want to just share with everyone because you love the message of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we understand how people have that perspective.
And that even goes without talking about other religions that aren't Christian, right? Even within Christianity as a missionary, I could connect easier with those who are Christian. And then I would have to go and explain to them that, well, I'm glad that you believe in Christ because he's the one true way to salvation. But you actually need to be baptized in our church because we actually have the fullness of the restored gospel. We have everything that you need. So you're halfway there with faith in Christ, but you need to have this. And so when you think about all of the other religions or non-religions, right, the lack of one, it just really starts to make you think internally again. Not that you have to change our belief system because other people have it differently, but really to try and like think internally, like what does this mean? Like we were born in a location to families who they were born into Christianity, who were born into the Mormon church. Like we are solely a product of our environment. And if that's like what we're left for, how many other factors shape what we believe, how successful we are, what kind of lives we live, our health that we have, like all of these things impact. But if we're strictly talking about religion, it's like if religion is just a chance based off of what's the popular consensus in the area, it just leaves a lot of questions up in the air, makes you think.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think. Of course, there are exceptions where people get converted in adults, and there's so many people who choose a different path for them than their childhood. But, you know, as a child, yeah, you're oftentimes being shaped and formed to believe certain things based on the area and the environment that you grow up in. That's, I feel like, kind of universal. You know?
Yeah, but it's also recognizing that for religion, because I think some people can say, well, you're a product of your environment because you are a rancher or whatever, like you grew up being more cowboy-like, or like you grew up in a very business family, so you're going to start your own business. But I think with religion, people look at it, at least within our community, I was always told it's like we are a chosen people. We are God's chosen people. We're blessed to be born within the church.
Yeah.
You know, I think it takes it to another level rather than saying like, well, of course you like the ocean. You live next to the beach.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different than that.
Yeah, because for us then, it pairs exactly with what we were noticing with happy German families. But then in point of what you're talking about, then we're also asking, like, why would our God only pick such a low percentage of people to be born into the gospel? Because I do feel like there is a little bit of a better than thou. I don't really know how else to describe it. Like maybe a sense of entitlement. Although I feel like Mormon members are very humble. They've been taught that. So not really entitlement, but I would say a different, better than thou kind of perspective. Like even in the Book of Mormon, they're taught that they're, kind of a peculiar people in a positive way. Like to be born into it, you have to do different things that might be peculiar. For the world standards, they're different. Not drinking coffee, that's different. But it's important and it's good that you're different because you're part of the one true church. And that's the standard that you have to live to in order to have this true happiness. For Tanner and I feel like we very, very early on, we grew up with that belief. But as soon as we started traveling and backpacking, it was like, I do not consider myself any better than this person who's Hindu in India or this Muslim in Indonesia. My version of God wouldn't give me the true church, wouldn't place me in a family that has blessed me with the one true church more than that person. Or think about the children in war-stricken communities, not to go off tangent, but it just really made us ask, for one, why us? And not them. And for two, this idea of like what you have to achieve to experience happiness. Well, now I'm starting to question it because they're really happy.
Yeah. And it makes you really reflect again on what do you consider normal versus truth versus, I guess, ignorance or lack of information, right?
Yeah, like what is your correct and what's your wrong?
Yeah, because morals change from population to population. Standards change, likes change. So at this point, we really weren't questioning a lot of like our spiritual beliefs in them. We were just, I guess, we talked about it. It was a faith expansion for us. We were really trying to see from other people's perspectives, seeing how what from the outside seemed like people living spiritual experiences through other activities besides worthiness checklists and through church meetings and stuff like that. Like they were outside doing things. And that's not in any way trying to say that the Mormon church doesn't do that, because they are one of the largest organizations for like service and stuff. It just seemed in some ways for us from the outside looking in, there was like this extra level of spirituality that they were able to like tap into. And who knows, like maybe this resonates with someone else. Like maybe this is how you felt, or maybe you were raised in the Mormon church and you said, this is absolutely nowhere close to what I experienced growing up. But like, that's just like our experience.
Yeah, I feel like when it came to the decisions that Germans were making or Europeans were making, it didn't seem like guilt was at the forefront of their decisions. It didn't seem like they were doing them because of a spiritual checklist that they had to achieve to get to a certain place. I feel like that's a really big difference between other people's experience and ours. And like Tanner said, maybe this resonates with you, maybe it doesn't. Honestly, guys, this is just our lived experience. We both grew up in very orthodox homes, like that were trying to do the absolute best that they could. Like our parents, there is no hard feelings with any of our family members, parents, grandparents, etc., because they were truly doing what they were supposed to do by teaching us this, by, attending church, all of these things. Like that was a family doing what it should be.
Yeah, really trying to keep the family together on a common purpose and goal. And we mentioned this in one of our other episodes, like we benefited so much from the way that we were raised in the community, and for me on a mission through us in our marriage and like what we wanted from our marriage in so many ways. And at the same time, we also recognize that we've grown so much by expanding our beliefs. I think we've become more inclusive. I think we've been able to have less prejudice when it comes to going to different countries, different cultures, food preferences, religious beliefs. Knowing that because our worldview has been expanded so much, we can look at it and say, even within Christianity, which we were raised in, there are so many aspects that don't align with like other religious beliefs, but there's so much overlap too. Genuinely, like every person wants to be a good contributor to society. Every person wants to feel love, inclusivity. And it's just a different path that people have designed and followed for centuries. And it just really plays out very differently after time goes on,
So one thing I wanted to talk about, because I think it's actually quite important to like even have a better understanding of our thought process here, is to talk about growing up in high demand religion. Now, some might say, no, I do not think growing up in the LDS church and Mormon faith, I don't think it is a high demand religion, but what do you think, Tanner?
I mean, honestly, it's hard to not say that there are a lot of requirements and checklists and then to have the same sentence say it's not a high demand religion. And I also think that there are plenty of members of the church who do say that it requires a lot, because I think the scripture says something like, for he who much is given, much is required, right? And like I get that in some instances. Like there's a responsibility when you're provided with something to like build up a community, to sustain something. Of course, on a religious beliefs, if you're receiving lots of blessings, the whole mentality, it's kind of similar to karma. Like what goes around comes around. So like if you're going to be blessing other people, you should be receiving blessings, right? That mentality, I think. So to go back to your initial question, like, do I think that the Mormon church is a high religion? I would say yes. It requires a lot. It requires a lot of dedication of time. It requires a sacrifice of many things. But ultimately, do people think that it's worth it? Absolutely.
I think it also depends if your connotation of high demand is positive or negative, right? Like in general, like if someone thinks, oh, it's not a bad thing for it to be high demand, well, then like maybe I can more easily accept that the answer is yes. But if they're going in thinking, oh, that's a negative thing, then they don't really want to admit that, even if it's true, because they don't want to feel negative in their body because it's something they love.
I think what constitutes a high demand or a demanding religion for me is the number of steps or the number of reasons that you have to come up to justify your belief or your practice. And I think that that can be very subjective and based on someone's opinion. But if you need to go into like deep detail why you have to do X, Y, and Z to be with your family forever, kind of comes across as being like a conditional love from heavenly parents. I know there's a lot of discussion and viewpoints on this subject, but I will say that during this time, we are beginning to realize and we're beginning to tally up physically and mentally the number of things that are leading to the church being a high demand religion for us.
Yeah, and at the time we're noticing these things, but we're not really understanding what's going on, I don't think. Like, I don't think we'd be able to put words to those feelings. And in fact, when we would have conversations, in part, it felt scary for me to even say, like, they look happy over there, but they don't even know what the LDS church is. I felt a little bit of guilt for one recognizing them, but then saying it was kind of difficult. I think most high demand religions create a sense of fear. Fear towards a lot of things. Fear of disappointing God. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of stepping outside of the structure. Or fear of losing that sense of community within that religion. Where we are now, I can look back and be like, I was experiencing a little bit of fear for even noticing that. Yeah, I am fearful of even saying that because like that's kind of not okay because that makes me think differently. And I'm scared to lose this community and this belief system. I'm scared to disappoint God, all of these things. And so it wasn't really that we were doubting like a lot in the church. It was just we were noticing. And that, in a sense, brought questioning. All innocent.
And all of that questioning just led to more curiosity, really. I would say that that was the turning point. Us being curious to ask questions, to get a different perspective, and like looking outside of church approved resources, which at this point wasn't even really on our radar. It was more of us just trying to be curious about like, okay, well, what do other people believe in? And like, how do other people thrive in world? And like, what's their hope? What's their driving force, right? Because we know everyone's not Christian. We know everyone's not religious, but it's more of like being curious to find out why was just something that kind of started it all. And ultimately it still took years of time for us to really digest and to understand, like, let alone put the time in, because it's time consuming.
Yeah.
Getting to understand more about ourselves and like what felt normal, natural, and then ultimately what felt best.
Yeah, having listened to our other podcasts about our childhood to our travels to now, you can start to see like our exposures to just the world, the big, beautiful world, are slowly chipping away at what we always thought was true, to then realize like there's so much truth found in different ways of living, in different beliefs, in different religions. And it's so exciting. But when you grow up thinking yours is the best, it hurts, it creates questions and it becomes complex. And so this is just a very small start to more of that journey.
So for us, it was it was almost natural at that point. It was becoming more common for us to put ourselves in these situations where we are stretching our mental capacity to like be comfortable in new space. And not that we were looking for it necessarily, but once we started, it was easy for us to say, this is going to help me be a better person, to understand myself better and understand others better.
Yeah, well said. We are coming up on our 1 year mark in Germany. So we're going to leave off here and jump back in on our next podcast where we stopped. But our first year was just such a whirlwind, highs, a lot of highs, but some lows. And it was fun to let you in on more of the behind the scenes. It was fun for us to reminisce. We love Germany.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining today, guys. We are going to be jumping back in, like Rissa said, on the rest of our time in Germany and just sharing more of our fun experiences that we had there. Ultimately, just sharing what Germany meant for us and how it became such a close part in our hearts.
We hope you have a Merry Christmas or
Frohe Weihnachten. And we hope that you guys get to spend lots of time with your loved ones, making some fun memories and staying warm like we're trying to do now. We have our fireplace going on because it is very cold, despite not snowing yet.
despite still being warmer than it ever was in Germany at this time.
Yeah. Thanks again for watching, everyone. Be sure to leave a review on Apple or Spotify podcasts if that's where you're listening to this video. And if you're on YouTube, be sure to write some comments asking us any questions. Again, every single podcast episode, we'd love to hear any questions that you have about something we talked about today, and especially if there's something you want us to cover in future videos talking about our life abroad. So with that, thank you so much. We'll see you in the next video.
Ciao ragazzi!